Well, thanks very much to Keith and Fauna and the Center on Global Justice and everybody else for staying. This is wonderful. And if you ever want to know when your nightmare of inadvertently walking onto a TED set when you weren't prepared or were equal to the competition or the presenters, that's the way I feel right now. I mean, so many people had so much incredible stuff this morning. I just feel pretty much humbled. I'm with the Nature Conservancy. I'm a conservation biologist. The Nature Conservancy, if you know who we are, we're one of the largest environmental organizations in the country, if not the world. Historically, traditionally, we've been known for buying and protecting land and water around the world. And so when you wonder why am I here? Well, one of the reasons is because the places we protect are affected by climate change. Climate change, our organization recognizes one of the key global challenges and crises of the times and the future. So the things that we've protected in the past and the things we want to protect in the future depend upon us knowing what's happening with climate. So we may lose the investments we've made, or at least severely diminish the value of those land and water investments we've made. The uncertainty of climate change makes it more difficult for us to know where to put our money or where to put the money we get from our donors and everybody else. There is no way to predict the future. I mean, we've heard the word predict, but really we don't. Prediction is a very semantic argument. But one thing we do know, based on all the great science, the good science that's being done by Scripps, UC San Diego, and others, is we know we have these scenarios which are pretty good forecasts of what things might be with the low emissions scenario, mid and high emission scenario. And today you've heard about what some of that stuff is, what contributes to it, and how we might address it. One of the things we also know is that the poor are going to be differentially and negatively affected by climate change. It's pretty much known throughout the world. And a recent document, this is from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, said, experience suggests the best way to address climate change impacts on the poor is by integrating adaptation responses into development planning. So I'll try to talk about this planning and adaptation a little bit. Another thing we know is that the majority of people right now live in cities, and that's only going to increase. Cities are where we must do a lot of our climate planning. A couple things I just want to try to convey. One is, what are the policies and what's driving San Diego's climate action planning? Second thing is, how are we doing? And what can we do differently and better? One of the things I want to point out quickly is just a contrast between San Diego and Chicago, both major metropolitan cities. San Diego, coastal, we have about 1.35 million residents, an average density of about 4,100 residents per square mile. Mild, benign, perfect, whatever you want to call the temperature, we have it. We, on average, emit about 9.8 tons of carbon equivalent per person per year. But look at the distribution. 55% of our greenhouse gas emissions are from transportation, 40% from building energy, and then waste and others about 5%. Look at Chicago, 2.8 million people in Chicago, an average density of 12,000 roughly, about 3 times the density we have. I don't know if you've ever lived in the Midwest. I lived in Cincinnati for a while. In the summers, 84 is not the 84 you're used to. It's hot, it's muggy, it's miserable. It takes a lot of energy to cool off. Their winters are freezing literally. High of 31, low of 18. That's the lowest. That's in January, I believe it is. Their carbon footprint per person, 12.7 tons per person per year. But look at the distribution. 21% from transportation, 70% from building and energy use, and then another 9% from other waste stream, et cetera. You've got to know your region. Regionalism makes a difference. You've got to know your region before you can even start to address the problem. Just a little bit on the future. Okay, so for San Diego, and I had a little difficulty trying to get absolutely comparable information on severe heat days. So this is a little bit odd, but if you look into the high emission scenarios, in 2050, San Diego area is going to have increased severe heat days, but it's a little bit different. And by 2100, somewhere between 3 and 10-fold increase in severe hot days. But Chicago is a little more discrete. They said 100 plus days. In 2050, a 5-fold increase. In 2100, a 10-fold increase. That's going to be a huge demand on the building energy, et cetera, et cetera. They don't have to worry about sea level rise, not in their picture. We've got maybe 5 feet plus if the high emission scenario occurs. We've got 55 plus inches to deal with at the sea level rise. So we've got a completely different set of concerns. Okay, quickly, what's driving us? It's really the state policies either intent or in regulation or driving us. So Governor Schwarzenegger issued his order. He wanted us to be at 1990 levels of greenhouse gas emissions statewide by 2020, and then 80% below that by 2050. And people thought that's crazy, but actually Seattle wants to be at a zero emissions in 2050. Chicago wants to be 80% below by 2050. So we're not unique. This is not necessarily out of the ballpark for anybody to think about. Then came AB 32 in 2006, which actually codified at least the first part for 2020. So the statewide would have our emissions reduced to 1990 levels by 2020. That same legislation also promoted the use of climate action plans, which had each jurisdiction, each city and county, should plan its climate action mitigation measures and adaptation measures. Didn't require it, but they should do it. Then a couple of years later, we got SB 375, which forced the major metropolitan organizations, basically like SANDAG, the San Diego Association of Governments, to come up with a regional transportation plan that embedded sustainable compact development in their plan. So we were going to reduce carbon through compact development, which would reduce the vehicle miles traveled supposedly, which then would result in less greenhouse gas. But the numbers and the requirements for SB 375 don't necessarily directly relate to AB 32. Then we had SBX 12, which is a renewable portfolio standard, very important because it said the utilities by 2020 have to have 33% of their electrical energy supply coming from clean, green renewables. We probably would have actually hit it by now, except for natural gas has depressed the cost of providing energy so much that there's a disincentive to increase green renewables. Two other things I should talk about a little bit quickly. Natural community conservation planning. That's what I did for 11 years in Southern California. It basically said, let's work at a landscape level, combine federal endangered and state endangered species permitting, let the jurisdiction say, if you commit to doing large-scale conservation, leave this stuff alone, develop this. We'll issue permits to the jurisdictions, it'll speed things up, but there'll be long-term commitments. And we're also starting to do this in the desert. So when you heard about these large solar facilities in the desert, we're starting to be more smart about where those things get placed, because we may all want renewable energy, we all may like solar and wind, but when you see where it goes sometimes, you may not want it. So if you're going to advocate for it, you better put it in the right places. One more thing, Baja actually has a climate action plan. They've done their inventory work. They're starting to work on economic and policy issues. So quickly, and this is really going to be unfair to all the institutions, but I just want to give you a smattering of what's happening. So Scripps, UCSD, we know that Scripps has had 50 years of climate and oceanographic information. The Keeling curve started a lot of this stuff. We've got the Climate Change Center, which was established in 2003, which is responsible for producing a vast amount of information for California municipalities on climate information. We've also got UCSD as a member of the Association of Pacific Rim Universities. There was just a conference about last fall. All the universities around the Pacific Rim started talking about this. They've got a climate sustainability group that's working on issues. It's great stuff. And then, as you know, urban studies and planning and the center, and then a vast number of other entities at UCSD that I didn't put on here, but that's my fault. So that's great. University of San Diego, the Energy Policy Initiative Center, you should all know about that. It's done a lot of work. It's under the School of Law, but it works on policies for, let me read this because otherwise I'll screw up. Conducts legal and policy research in renewable energy credits, distributed energy, solar, electricity grid, public interest programs. It also produced, along with another entity, the carbon inventory, the greenhouse gas inventory for all of the jurisdictions in San Diego. And they just recently published, and you can access it if you want to, a energy calculator for San Diego, for all the jurisdictions. It's really very interesting and very useful. San Diego State, you heard a little bit about the School of Public Health. They're doing a lot of work on climate change and looking at health risks. And actually there's some modeling that's being done with downscaled models where you can actually look at census tract level information of health risks. So talk about health justice and all that and climate change. You can tie those big stuff down to the small stuff. San Diego State also has quite a bit of work they're doing with ecosystem and species effects. So quickly, so non-governmental organizations, what are we all doing? And there's a lot of us around here. So what we do is, some of us sponsor education and research and all that. San Diego Foundation has done some great work. They did a 3-year visioning document for what does San Diego want in terms of a long-term plan. It wasn't necessarily specific to climate change, but it was Basically, it ended up with let's be smarter with growth, let's be more compact, let's do all these great things. It was not regulatory, it was just a visioning document. They also helped fund some of the inventory work. Natural area work, Nature Conservancy has done some work on modeling of species, natural species shifts with climate change. If you assume certain scenarios, how much do you think the native plants and all that will shift? It's a lot more than you might imagine, and we need these large landscapes of conserved open space for things to shift and move, but it may not even be enough. We may need permeability through the cities even, and through urban areas. Advocacy, groups like, sorry, let me go back. Transit's a very big issue. 55% of our greenhouse gases come from transit. Move San Diego, Walk San Diego, Sierra Club work on that. Quickly on planning and design, there's a lot of work being done. Let me see, get back here. I don't want to short shift anybody, but I got 5 minutes left, so I want to get to a few more points. Okay, so we've got C3, the City Council of Professional Designers, San Diego Housing Federation, Environmental Justice. We've got an Environmental Health Coalition, Urban Forest Council. A lot of us work on that. And one of the key things is there's all these NGOs out there. We all work on specific sort of functions, and we don't even talk very well, as much as we'd like to. It's a big issue. We're starting to work on these collaboratives that Keith talked about. It's becoming much more useful. I think the next connection is going to be between academics, NGOs, and bureaucrats. So let me just quickly go about two examples of what's happening. Keith mentioned the RTP. Okay, so it was approved in 2011. It was for all of San Diego, how to reduce our greenhouse gases using this compact development. Well, they did it. It made the small incremental changes to the greenhouse gas reductions, but they really were pretty small compared to what it probably could have done. They didn't really line up with the state's goals. It got litigated, it lost. The judge found that basically it didn't comport with the state's goals. It also deferred so much to local jurisdictions that it probably wasn't going to be implemented. Hence, it got litigated and lost. San Diego's coming up with a new one. They have to, every 4 years, update it anyhow. There's a big public involvement process. If anyone want to get involved with it, go to San Diego's website. It's a good thing to get involved with. Another thing, the City of San Diego's CMAP, or Climate Mitigation Adaptation Plan. Every jurisdiction should be doing them. A few jurisdictions are. San Diego, under the previous administration, not the current administration, put out 2 plans. And in 2012, the one that's out there right now, what it did, I don't know if there's this pointer that works. Anyway, on the graph, first thing, what we're showing is the blue top line with the dotted black. That's the best, that's the business as usual. That's what will happen if we don't do anything. That's carbon emissions. We're going to go from 12 something to about 16 plus by 2035. What we want to do, and we are right now, is we think we can hit our target of 2020 and actually meet the state goal in 2020. But according to the plans we've seen so far, what happens in 2035, a very small decrease, we're almost stable. But where we should be by 2035 is there. 3.5 million metric tons per year we should be reducing. We are not on the trajectory to achieve what most people would say is a prudent objective. Thankfully, the new administration has been very vocal about wanting to have a new climate plan. All of us should get involved. You talk about civic engagement, that's a big one. It's in our backyards. Oh, that's okay, thanks. So quickly, what I think we could be doing better, one of the things I really would advocate would be to have this regional transportation plan, which is going to be developed in 2015. We got 2.5 years to do it right, but it didn't do very well because it basically didn't embed a lot of local improvements in it. Because San Diego is not a land use jurisdiction authority, it couldn't change land use, it couldn't do a lot of things that it probably should have done. So what we need to do is link that up with these climate action plans. So build the foundation from the bottom up, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and then when it goes to San Diego, then they will say, oh, each of these cities, which sit on the San Diego board, we've already committed to doing these things. Yeah, we want this regional transportation plan to be much more robust, much more greenhouse gas reduction efficient. Another thing we should do is not focus on greenhouse gases. We ought to focus on the health benefits, the environmental benefits, the transit benefits, the justice benefits, you name it, all those benefits. But we also need to be aware of and measure what the GHG implications are. Not that it should drive everything, but if you don't know what you're doing in terms of greenhouse gases, that's really a bad thing. You need to measure that. It's a good metric. But don't focus on that because most people's eyes glaze over. Another thing is, I personally think that a green infrastructure policy for this region would be great. I mean, yeah, we've got parks departments that look at parks. We've got people who advocate for community gardens. We've got someone who might be advocating for urban forests in the area, but they're all sort of one-off type things. We need an embracing policy that's equivalent to a transportation plan and policy for this green infrastructure. That would link up with this great commitment we've already made in the ex-urban area. It links in with it. It would also probably amplify. We've got a lot of isolated canyons that could be linked up with complete streets and urban forests. It also has some carbon benefits. The last thing is get out of our silos. Communicate, cooperate, collaborate. We probably heard it again and again, but I was watching people's eyes as the University of California, San Diego's energy system was talked about. And I think a lot of professors who are here, I watched their eyes open up like, we're doing this? We've done all that? I mean, if you don't, we're all guilty of it. If you don't even know what's going on in your own backyard, how can you make really good links ups and collaborations with others? You've got to get out of those silos, talk, don't spend 5% of your time with collaborations, 95% of the time you do the things you're paid to do or your constituency wants you to do. With that, thank you very much.